Do you know those mornings? The ones that hum with the quiet predictability of routine, the gentle clink of a coffee cup, the distant murmur of city traffic, the comfortable weight of a plan laid out. That was the morning of April 12th in Savannah, Georgia. A day that, by all accounts, should have unfolded like countless others for Judge Beatrice Vance. Savannah, a city draped in Spanish moss and history, where the air hums with stories whispered through generations, and at its heart, rising majestically against the vibrant sky, stood the Magnolia Federal Courthouse. A grand, imposing structure of polished granite and towering columns, its very presence seemed to declare, here, justice resides. Inside, the hushed corridors echoed with the serious business of law, the gravitas of decisions that shaped lives. It was a place of solemn vows, weighty pronouncements, and the steady, unwavering pursuit of truth. Judge Beatrice Vance had dedicated the better part of 3 decades to that pursuit. She moved through the world with a quiet grace, her intellect a sharp, gleaming blade she rarely needed to brandish. To most who knew her, she was a figure of profound integrity, her judgments as balanced as the scales she swore to uphold. But today, she wasn't arriving in her stately black robes, heralded by age. Today, she walked in as Beatrice Vance, citizen, just another face in the morning crowd, her keen eyes observing, absorbing, missing nothing. It was a deliberate choice, a way to ground herself, to feel the pulse of the very public she served, to step outside the gilded cage of her office and see the system through different eyes. She believed in the power of empathy, in understanding the ground truth before issuing a decree from on high. Little did she know, this ordinary Tuesday morning, this quiet act of humility, would become the crucible of her career and the catalyst for a reckoning that would echo far beyond the marbled halls of justice. There's a subtle dance that happens in places of power, a silent agreement on who belongs, who has access, and who must be questioned. For Judge Vance, navigating this dance had become second nature. She carried herself with an aura of competence that usually bypassed scrutiny. But then, there are those who see a different kind of badge, one not earned through merit, but assumed through prejudice. How prejudiced? As she approached the security checkpoint, a knot of unease began to tighten in her stomach. Standing guard was Deputy Sterling Finch. Finch wasn't new to the courthouse. In fact, his presence was as much a fixture as the grand columns outside. He had a reputation, known for his rigid, old-school demeanor. A man who viewed the world in stark black and white, and whose interpretation of order often bordered on outright intimidation. He embodied a specific kind of unchecked power, the kind that thrives in the shadows of oversight, where protocol can become a shield for prejudice. He was a small man in a big uniform who seemed to inflate himself with every person he stopped, every minor infraction he unearthed. "Ma'am, step aside." His voice was a low growl, devoid of courtesy, the kind that immediately puts you on edge. Judge Vance, calm as ever, met his gaze. "Good morning, officer. I'm Judge Vance, on my way to chambers." She reached into her bag, pulling out her federal judge's badge, its silver eagle gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the security hall. It was undeniable, official, a clear sign of her authority. But Finch didn't even glance at it. His eyes were fixed, not on the badge, but on her, on the deep, rich tone of her skin, on the meticulously braided hair that framed her face with a crown of silver and black. He sneered, a small, dismissive gesture. "Save it, sweetheart. I've got a job to do." Everyone gets screened, especially if they're trying to sneak in looking casual. The word sweetheart hit her like a slap, not just for its condescension, but for the casual, ingrained disrespect it carried. It was a dismissal of her entire being, her position, her very personhood. It was designed to diminish. Before she could respond, before her sharp legal mind could even formulate a retort, he reached out, a gloved hand firmly gripping her arm, steering her, not towards the main screening area, but a side door marked private. She felt the shift, the chilling isolation of it. This wasn't about security. This was about something far more insidious. He ushered her into a small windowless room, stark white walls, a single steel chair bolted to the floor, and on a small scarred table beside it, sitting idle, glinting under the single fluorescent tube, was a pair of electric clippers. The kind you use for a quick buzz cut. The kind that in this context felt less like a grooming tool and more like an instrument of deliberate, calculated humiliation. The air in the small room grew thick, heavy with unspoken intent. Her heart began to pound, not from fear, but from a cold, rising certainty. She understood, in that moment, what this was. This wasn't a random search.
This was a message, a brutal, dehumanizing message delivered with the cold efficiency of a man who believed himself untouchable, a man who saw her not as a federal judge, but as just another Black woman he could bully, break, and remind of her place.
You think you're special, huh? Finch's voice was a low sneer as he picked up the clippers, their metallic hum suddenly alive, buzzing to life. The sound filled the small room like a swarm of angry bees vibrating through the silence, a prelude to the violation. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. Her eyes, unwavering, held his. But inside, something ancient and powerful, something forged in generations of resilience, began to stir. Her hair, rooted in family, in history, in identity, now under threat. This wasn't just about a haircut. It was about an assault on her very being. And then, the cold vibration touched her scalp, the clippers buzzed, and a thick coil of her meticulously braided silver-streaked hair fell to the floor, a quiet witness to an unspeakable act. Finch's eyes, devoid of empathy, met hers in the mirror. He continued, methodically, cruelly, until one side of her head was bare. He wasn't just shaving her head. He was trying to shave away her dignity, her power, her very identity. He was trying to reduce a federal judge to nothing. This wasn't just about a racist act. It was an act of raw, unchecked power assertion, a symptom of a deeper rot. Finch's actions weren't a fluke. They were a predictable outcome of a system that allowed individuals to operate with impunity, cloaked in the authority of their uniform. It's a common misconception, often believed in places like this courthouse, that justice is inherent within its walls, but often the very people sworn to uphold the law become its biggest violators, hiding behind procedure and protocol to mask their own prejudices. Finch's calm, almost bored demeanor as he carried out this act spoke volumes about how normalized such behavior had become for him, how deeply entrenched his sense of invincibility truly was. He finished, stepped back, the clippers still humming. Now, you can go. His voice was flat, as if he had just completed a mundane task. Judge Vance slowly stood, her hand instinctively reaching up to touch the brutally shorn side of her head. The coldness of her scalp was jarring, a stark contrast to the warmth of her remaining braids. She looked at him, then at herself in the faint reflection of the polished metal door. Her eyes, still unwavering, narrowed. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, yet vibrating with an intensity that cut through the humming silence of the clippers, she spoke. "You'll regret this." The words hung in the air, a quiet promise, a chilling prophecy. Deputy Sterling Finch just smirked, a small, dismissive gesture. He had no idea the earthquake he had just unleashed. He thought he had broken her. He thought he had made her small. But what he had actually done was ignite a fire, a quiet, furious fire that would not just consume him, but expose the entire structure that had protected him for far too long. The kind of fire that would burn so bright, it would illuminate the darkest corners of injustice and demand a reckoning that echoed far beyond this windowless room. The calm was over. The storm was just beginning. The hum of the clippers seemed to echo in the cavernous silence of the courthouse halls long after Deputy Finch had released his grip. Judge Beatrice Vance walked, one hand instinctively rising to the brutally shorn side of her head, feeling the cold, exposed scalp. It was a physical ache, yes, but more than that, it was a profound, almost primal violation. Her hair, those meticulously braided, silver-streaked coils, were more than just strands. They were a crown of identity, woven with the threads of her family's history, her ancestors' struggles, her very essence as a black woman. Now, uneven tufts were all that remained, a stark, painful testament to an act of petty, racist power. But something else was stirring within her, something deeper than the sting of humiliation. It was a low, burning ember that began to glow brighter with every measured step, a furnace igniting in her chest, fueled not by a frantic, screaming rage, but by a quiet, steel-cold purpose. There would be no tears. There would be no hysterics. Finch had sought to diminish her, to break her spirit, but in that small windowless room, amidst the falling hair, he had unwittingly forged her resolve into something sharper, something far more dangerous to him than any outburst. This was not a moment for breakdown. It was a moment for breakthrough. The walk from that sterile room to the grand courtroom felt like an odyssey. Each click of her heels against the polished marble floor was a deliberate, almost defiant beat. She passed by other courthouse staff, clerks, junior deputies, a few lawyers. Their eyes, wide with a mixture of confusion and recognition, flickered to her shorn head, then quickly looked away. They had heard. Perhaps some had even seen. But not one of them spoke. Not one offered a word of comfort or outrage. That silence, that collective turning away, was a stark reminder of the pervasive culture of fear and complicity that allowed men like Finch to operate with such impunity. It was the insidious agreement that protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. But in their averted gazes, Beatrice saw not just cowardice, but also an opportunity. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. She would not let their silence define her. Judge Vance was scheduled to enter the courtroom through her private chambers, a place of quiet preparation where her ceremonial robes awaited. Decorum was always preserved. The grand theater of justice played out with precision. But today, the script had been violently torn up. Today, plans didn't matter. There was only one path, one entry that truly mattered. She stopped just outside the double doors of courtroom 3B, a heavy oak barrier that seemed to guard the very sanctity of the law. She took a deep, deliberate breath, steadying the tremor that tried to run through her. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about something bigger. With a quiet strength that belied the turmoil within, she pushed both doors open wide. The courtroom, moments before a low hum of anticipation, stilled instantly. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Heads turned, a slow, collective swivel. And then the realization began to ripple through the room like an electric current. Lawyers, journalists scribbling notes, plaintiffs, defendants, they all stared, some in confusion, others in wide-eyed disbelief. They had seen her, or heard whispers of a black woman being accosted at security. Now, standing there, regal despite the brutal assault on her hair, was the woman they knew. The woman whose empty chair sat waiting at the front, behind the elevated bench. Her heels clicked loudly against the marble floor as she walked past the rows of stunned faces. Every click seemed to resonate with a newfound power, a rhythm of defiance. All eyes followed her as she moved towards the empty judge's bench. Deputy Sterling Finch, still posted by the side door, the man who had held the clippers, went absolutely still when her gaze locked with his. The blood drained from his face, leaving it ashen. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The smug confidence that had marked him just minutes ago evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked horror. He knew. He finally knew. Beatrice didn't flinch. She simply reached for the heavy black robe, folded neatly over the arm of her chair. She didn't ask for help. She didn't wait for ceremony. Slowly, deliberately, she slipped it on. The fabric, once a symbol of authority, now felt like armor, settling on her shoulders with the weight of purpose, of a battle yet to be fully fought. She adjusted it, then turned to the court clerk, her voice even, cutting through the thick silence. "Is the docket ready?" The clerk, flustered, stammered, "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Vance nodded once, then lowered herself into her chair, the leather groaning softly beneath her. She looked straight ahead, her gaze sweeping over the assembled faces, but never directly touching the man who had humiliated her. Not yet. Her voice, clear and steady, filled the room. "We will begin today with preliminary testimony on Case 2371F, United States versus Savannah Police Department. Charges of abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations. All parties present." A murmur of, "Yes, Your Honor," echoed back. The attorneys, their faces a mixture of wide-eyed shock, guilt, and even anger, shifted in their seats. Angry that a black woman had dared walk in after what they assumed had destroyed her. Angry that she was still standing. She ignored them all. "We will proceed." Face was the quiet fury. The dignity transformed into purpose. It wasn't about screaming for justice. It was about calmly, meticulously dismantling the very system that allowed injustice to fester. Deputy Sterling Finch, in his twisted attempt to exert control, had only succeeded in awakening a force he could never comprehend, let alone contain. The curtain had been pulled back. The stage was set, and the true reckoning was about to begin. The echoes of his clippers would now be drowned out by the thunder of true justice. The murmurs in courtroom 3B slowly died down as Judge Beatrice Vance called for a short recess. The grand room emptied in a daze, lawyers whispering like they were afraid to speak too loud, reporters typing furiously on their laptops. But Judge Vance remained seated, a statue of quiet power behind the bench. After several long minutes, when only her diligent clerk, 2 silent officers, and a very pale Deputy Sterling Finch remained, she finally looked at him. Deputy Finch, her voice cut through the stillness, sharp as shattered glass. He stopped mid-step, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Yes, Your Honor," he stammered, visibly shrinking. She motioned to the open center of the courtroom, the space where witnesses usually stood. He obeyed, moving like a man walking towards a cliff's edge, every step heavy with dread. "State your full name for the record." He blinked. "Excuse me?" You heard me. Your full name." Turning, "Hank Finch," he swallowed hard. "How long have you served as bailiff at this courthouse, Mr. Finch?" 14 years, Your Honor." His voice was barely a whisper now. Judge Vance tapped a pen against her legal pad. Once. Twice. The sound seemed to reverberate through the silent room like a thunderclap. Then she leaned forward, her gaze locking onto his. "And in those 14 years, how many women have you assaulted in that screening room?" The color drained from his face, leaving it ashen, almost green. Your Honor, I didn't know." "That's not what I asked," she cut him off, her voice low but piercing. He looked around for help, his eyes darting desperately between the impassive officers and the stone walls. None came. "How many complaints have been filed against you, Deputy Finch?" "I'm not sure, Your Honor." His voice trembled. Judge Vance's voice rose, not in volume, but in a chilling precision. 12. 12 formal complaints, all buried, all dismissed, Because you hid behind procedure and protocol. His mouth trembled, but no sound came out. You didn't know who I was, did you? She snapped, her voice cracking the stillness. You thought I was no one, just another black woman you could bully, shave, humiliate, for sport. The room was dead silent. You didn't even bother to ask for my name. He tried to speak again, but only a strangled gasp escaped. Judge Vance slowly rose from the bench, her voice gaining a terrible power. Because of you, Mr. Finch, this courthouse, this supposed temple of justice, has been stained. Because of your actions, the sanctity of this court is now under question. And because you assaulted a federal judge in her own courthouse, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation, effective immediately. She turned to the two officers standing by the exit. Escort Deputy Finch into custody. Separate from general population. Formal charges to follow. The officers moved quickly, cuffs already in hand. No, wait! Finch shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. You can't do this! But he was wrong. She already had. His badge was surrendered, his power stripped, and the silence that followed was heavy with the weight of shattered authority. The courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a stage where a powerful, long-overdue drama had just begun. This wasn't just about a racist act. It was a glaring indictment of systemic failure. The 12 buried complaints weren't just numbers. They were a chilling testament to how easily a system can protect its own. How often those in power turn a blind eye to misconduct for the sake of perceived stability. It's a common pitfall in many institutions, prioritizing reputation and internal cohesion over true accountability. Said bringing them forward would undermine public trust, that it would make the courthouse look weak. This insidious justification is precisely how prejudice and abuse are allowed to fester, creating a culture where justice is delayed, denied, or buried to preserve appearances. The battle was far from over. In fact, the quiet hume that replaced Finch's shouts felt like the eerie calm before a much larger storm. After the profound silence settled, Judge Vance called the next witness in the ongoing police misconduct hearing. The initial case on the docket, forgotten in the dramatic turn of events, was now given a renewed, searing focus. The first witness was a man named Harold Vance, mid-40s, a warehouse foreman with a salt-and-pepper beard, and hands rough from decades of labor. His eyes were hollow but determined, reflecting a deep, unhealed wound. He was there to testify about how his 17-year-old son had been tackled and pinned during a peaceful protest by the very officers now seated at the defense table. One of them had crushed the boy's windpipe with his knee. The teen survived, barely, but still couldn't speak above a whisper 9 months later. Harold sat on the witness stand and told the court everything. How they had begged for paramedics, how they were told he'll be fine, he's faking, how no one listened, and how, when the footage came out, none of the officers were disciplined. Judge Vance didn't interrupt once. Every word the man spoke was a blade slicing through the courtroom, leaving no one untouched. When he finished, Judge Vance leaned forward. Mr. Vance, thank you for your courage. I know this isn't easy. He nodded, his voice cracking. I just want to know that it meant something, that someone is finally listening. Judge Vance looked at him, not from the bench, not as a judge, but as someone who knew exactly what it felt like to be silenced. You've been heard, she said, a little after midnight. A few minutes later, as Harold Vance slowly walked past the officers who had nearly taken his son's life, Judge Vance called for another short recess. It was during this quiet pause that a timid figure approached the bench. It was Mara Jones, one of the younger interns, glasses slightly fogged, her face pale. She hesitated, then closed the door behind her and stepped forward. I wanted to say, I saw it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What happened with Deputy Finch this morning outside the screening room? I didn't know what to do. I should have said something. I was scared. Judge Vance, didn't answer right away. She just studied the young woman's trembling hands, a silent acknowledgement of the fear that had paralyzed so many. Then she said gently, "Thank you for telling me that. That matters." I didn't stop it. Maren whispered, her eyes welling up. "No," Judge Vance replied. "But you're speaking now? That's more than most." Mara looked like she might cry, but she straightened her shoulders. "If you need me to testify, I will." Judge Vance reached across the desk and placed a hand over the girl's, just for a moment. No words, just warmth. It was a silent lesson. Even small acts of courage like speaking up can create monumental shifts. The importance of creating a safe space for truth to emerge was undeniable. The courtroom doors creaked open again, signaling the public's return. Judge Vance stood. "All rise," the clerk called out, her voice steadier this time. Everyone did, even the ones who had once laughed at Finch's jokes behind closed doors. The atmosphere had changed subtly, but sharply. The power was no longer in question. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. And the first crack in the wall had been made. The afternoon brought with it a different kind of storm, not of rain, but of information. Judge Vance's chambers, usually a sanctuary of quiet reflection, buzzed with a new urgency. There was a knock, and her clerk entered, her face alight with an unusual excitement. "Your Honor," she said, "there's someone asking to speak with you from the DOJ. They said it's urgent." A moment later, a man in a crisp gray suit stepped through the door, calm and composed amidst the palpable tension. He handed over a sealed envelope. "Judge Vance, I'm with the Office of Civil Rights. I was dispatched the moment reports surfaced about this morning's incident." "Fast response," he noted, almost as a question. Judge Vance unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the official seal. "This courthouse," she stated, her voice steady, "is under federal review." The man from the DOJ continued, his tone grim. "What happened in that screening room is more than misconduct. It's a Title 18 violation, and now that we know the victim was a federal judge," he trailed off, letting the weight of that truth hang in the air. Judge Vance didn't need to respond. The implications were clear. "We're opening an immediate investigation into Magnolia District Courthouse staff, prior complaints, suppression of reports, and potential obstruction." "Good," she said quietly. "Start with the supervisors who buried those 12 complaints against Finch." She paused, her gaze distant. "Then look at the judges who signed off." The DOJ official nodded, as if he already knew she'd say that. "Oh, and Judge Vance," he added, pausing at the door, "you should know the footage of this morning has gone viral. It's everywhere. National news, social media, even some folks in the Senate are talking about it." Judge Vance gave the faintest shake of her head. "I didn't do it for them." The man offered a slight smile. "No, Your Honor. That's why it matters." When he left, she sank slowly into her chair. The fight wasn't over, not even close. Because the courtroom may have seen Finch fall, but they hadn't seen what came next. The public outcry, fueled by the viral video, brought an immediate, unavoidable spotlight. This external pressure was crucial in forcing the hands of those who might otherwise have continued to operate in the shadows. It highlights a critical aspect of systemic change. Sometimes, the glare of public opinion is the only thing powerful enough to penetrate institutional complacency. This isn't just about accountability for the individual, but about forcing institutions to confront their own failings when denial is no longer an option. It's a common, if unfortunate, reality that many injustices remain hidden until they gain enough public traction to become impossible to ignore. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted again. It hung in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm, a palpable weight that made people sit straighter, speak quieter, and think twice before assuming they knew who held the power. Judge Vance stepped back onto the bench with an undeniable presence. No bailiff announced her this time, no ceremonial flourish, just the quiet rustle of her robe as she took her seat. Everyone rose instinctively. She didn't speak right away, letting her gaze sweep over the room, from the defendants to the press, the attorneys, and the silent crowd of onlookers. They were waiting to see what she would do next, how far she'd go, whether this was going to be a moment or a movement. She tapped the gavel once. Court is now in session. And just like that, everything settled. She turned her attention to the attorneys seated at the prosecution table. Call your next witness. The room hushed again as Lieutenant Daniel Cook was sworn in, tall, built like a linebacker, his face clean-shaven with that rigid posture that screamed he thought his badge made him invincible. He sat down, cleared his throat, and folded his hands in his lap. Judge Vance studied him for a long second. She knew the type. Proud, polished, trained to lie with a smile and never break a sweat. The prosecutor began her questioning, methodical and precise. Lieutenant Cook, you were present at the demonstration on May 14th of last year, correct? Yes, ma'am. And during that time, you oversaw a team of 7 officers? Yes, that's correct. Did you personally authorize the use of force against protesters? Cook leaned forward slightly, speaking into the mic like he was giving a press briefing. I authorized non-lethal crowd control measures after protesters became aggressive. There was yelling, pushing, some were armed with bottles and rocks. Any injuries reported from your team? No, ma'am. And the injuries sustained by protesters? Minor, mostly bruises. Judge Vance's voice cut through before the prosecutor could move on. Lieutenant Cook. He turned toward her. Yes, Your Honor. Her question hung in the air, a steel blade. Do you consider a crushed trachea to be a minor injury? Well, no, ma'am. Of course not. Judge Vance leaned forward slightly. Then why did your official incident report describe it as a soft tissue trauma consistent with resistance? Cook hesitated. That's standard language. It was based on initial impressions. Initial impressions from whom? He shifted in his seat. I believe it was Officer Valdez who filled out that section. Judge Vance kept her gaze locked on him. And did you review and approve that language? A pause. Then, yes, Your Honor. Her tone never wavered. Knowing that the victim was 17 years old and unarmed? Cook opened his mouth, closed it, then finally answered, yes. Her tone never wavered. Do you believe justice was served that day? Silence. I believe we followed protocol. She sat back in her chair. That wasn't the question. Cook cleared his throat again. With respect, Your Honor, I can't answer that. That's not my role. Judge Vance nodded slowly. No, it's mine. She turned to the prosecution. You may proceed. The rest of the testimony was dry, clinical, but every word landed like a blow. It wasn't just the facts. It was the way they tried to make them sound normal, acceptable, routine. The casual disregard for human suffering, normalized through bureaucratic language, was a testament to how deeply entrenched this systemic issue truly was.